What if Prim wasn't killed by the bombs? Would Katniss still be in touch with Gale? I do actually think that the answer to this is no, at least not to the degree that Katniss once was. When reading Mockingjay and when watching the film as well, you can see that Katniss and Gale are slowly distancing throughout the whole book. Katniss realizes throughout the book that the war has shaped Gale into a person that she no longer recognizes. And I think this is really encompassed in their conversation in District 2 when they're all debating how to get into the nut. Gale's idea is essentially a wolf trap where you either flush them out of the mountain or you trap them in, essentially killing them. Because it's his belief that as long as no one has the access to the military stronghold, it's still an advantage on their side. And while this is true, Katniss can't get over the fact that he would be killing innocents in there because there are just workers who are doing their job. But Gale is fixated on the fact that Snow did not have that same hesitation when he bombed District 12. And while Katniss can't refute this because it's true, she's also aware that Gale is now using capital mentality in order to win the war. And similarly, Gale can't understand why Katniss is so against using capital mentality to win the war. And we can see very clearly here that they have different mentalities and different methods of going about winning. And these aren't just little disagreements that they can chat over and get over with. These are fundamentally different opinions about the value of a human life. And they continue to distance and separate throughout this book. And while Gale guesses that Katniss's plan is to go off on her own and assassinate President Snow, Katniss doesn't tell him until he actually tells her. And this is very different from the previous book where Katniss goes to Gale first to tell him that she wants to run away into the woods with everyone and escape the capital and escape President Snow. In Mockingjay, we can see them distancing from each other and we can see them needing different things but still clinging on to the past they had together. And while we often talk about Katniss' side of things and how she doesn't view Gale as a partner that she could be with in the long term, I also think we need to consider Gale's side of things. Because he has had this vision of Katniss as his wife for so long and he's been holding on to it for dear life. Even though by this point, Katniss and him would not make a good couple. Katniss would not be able to give him what he needs. And I think it was always inevitable that Katniss was going to go home to District 12, whereas Gale had seen the destruction of District 12 and he had been first-hand witness to the absolute mass devastation that occurred. And so I do wonder if that by this point Gale had already outgrown District 12 and needed more and wanted to do more and help more, rebuild the whole country. But I definitely do think that a big pull for Katniss returning to District 12 was that it reminded her of Prim, and she wanted to be around Prim. So let's say that Prim lives. What happens then? I do still believe that Katniss, Prim, and their mother will return to District 12 because they'll want to help rebuild their home. I think a major part of why Katniss's mother couldn't return to District 12 was because it reminded her of everything she had lost. And Katniss's mother had lost a lot. But I think that losing Prim was the final straw. She couldn't do it anymore. She couldn't go back to that place. But if Prim was still in the picture, then they still had that family that they've been holding on to for 6 years since her husband died. And so while the ghosts and the cracks would still be there, they wouldn't be as recent. For Katniss's part, I do think she would still be severely traumatized from this entire experience. She likely wouldn't have fallen into such a deep depression as she had when Prim had died, but she would still need a lot of comforting and still suffer from lots of night terrors. And as Katniss told us in the books, it was always going to be her and Peter at the end, so her and Peter still would have become a couple. But would she still have kept in touch with Gale? Where would Gale have gone? I still believe that by that point, Gale's purpose had outgrown District 12. He still would have wanted to do more to help rebuild the whole country, and he still likely would have gone to District 2. But without that final gaping hole of Prim's death, I think they might have still kept in touch very casually, maybe phone calls once or twice a year just to catch up. And it likely might have dwindled throughout the years. They might have visited each other, but again, I don't think it would have been an active relationship by that point. Because they'd grown apart too far, even before Prim had died. And I think in order to heal properly, they needed to separate.